When I was a teenager, I was very shy. I felt really nervous around people and sometimes thought I might have been on the autism spectrum. I was into nerdy things like reading books and playing video games all the time. It didn't help that I didn't have any brothers or sisters. My mom and dad would always tell me to go outside and play sports or make friends, but I always felt best when I was by myself. We live on the edge of a big city, and our town was still growing at the time. So many of the houses were built to spec, not like the suburbs, where the houses look identical. Our closest neighbor was about 200 yards from our house. We live in a big 5-bedroom house with a huge yard. My mom and dad were tenured professors at the big university in the city. They would leave home at 6 in the morning and come back when it was getting dark outside. Because we live in a somewhat countryside with dirt road, I had to walk about half a mile to catch the school bus at 7:30 in the morning. One day, after the school bus dropped me off and I was walking towards my home, my neighbor pulled up beside me and asked if I wanted a ride. I found it a bit odd because my house was really close by. I still said yes to be nice because I recognized his car from seeing it at my neighbor's house. He also looked like my neighbor, and it was the first time I had met him. He said hello to me for the first time, and he seemed like he knew me better than I knew him. He mentioned that my parents talked about me a lot. They told him that I spent most of my time at home playing video games. He said he used to be a gamer too when he was younger, but now he likes outdoors. That was why he moved out here. He was around 35 years old at the time. Even though he offered, I didn't accept the invitation to come to his house for barbecue. I like being by myself, spending time alone, and playing video games with my virtual friends online. After a while, my neighbors started coming back from work. When my boss would drop me off, he would give me a ride to my house. I mostly stayed quiet while he chatted and chatted. I was like a listener who never said much because I was really shy. He shared a lot with me. He told me about his wife, his job, his son, his friends, his best friend named Marcus, where he grew up, and almost everything about him. He said he often dreamt about living in a quiet countryside where there is less noise. He also mentioned how much he likes his yard and having barbecues and drinking beers. I used to believe that the main reason he gave me rides was to have someone to talk to, since he was really outgoing. Then, about a year later, when I was around 14, my dad bought me a really fancy night vision telescope as a Christmas gift. It cost about $5,000. We got it because where we live, there's hardly any bright lights at night. We can see a big part of the sky filled with stars. My parents got the telescope so that I would have something else to look at apart from my computer. Since my room was upstairs, I put the telescope on my window and looked at the stars. I could see planets like Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, depending on the direction I was looking or the location I placed the telescope around the house. But after a while, I got a bit tired of looking at the stars, so I aimed the telescope towards my neighbors' houses. Most of the houses are one story and had metal chain fences, so I could see into their yards and sometimes through their windows. I got curious about my neighbor, the one that would give me rides from school. In the evenings, especially on weekends, he would be in his yard grilling food, and his 3-year-old son would be playing around. He often had his friend Marcus visit. He told me about Marcus before, saying they worked together and liked hanging out on weekends. With my night vision telescope, even though they were quite far away, I could adjust the telescope to see tiny details on their faces in the darkness. On a Sunday evening, I used my telescope and saw my neighbor hanging out with his friend Marcus. Marcus was drinking, and my neighbor's wife was there too, with their son playing around in the quiet night. At first, I thought it was the same as every other weekend and was about to return to my computer, but then I saw something that made me very interested. I noticed that Marcus grabs my neighbor's wife's breast whenever he's not watching. It confused me for a moment because I didn't get what was happening and why Marcus was doing that when my neighbor wasn't looking. She tried to knock his hand off, but didn't attempt to move away. What surprised me was that he was doing this in front of their 3-year-old son. At that time, I was 14 years old, and I knew what infidelity meant. Even though I was still a virgin and not very good at social dynamics. I understood the situation I was seeing through my telescope. They had my full attention because he only touched her when the neighbor wasn't watching, like an erotic game between each other. Sometimes it could be as much as 10 minutes between when he touched her. So I decided to attach a recorder to the telescope and started recording what was happening. This went on until my neighbor went back into the house, and Marcus immediately got up, went straight to sucking my neighbor's wife's stuff. I was shocked. Back then, I wasn't into adult content, and that was as close as he got. He immediately returned when he heard my neighbor coming back out. I was surprised about the risk he was taking. What if he gets caught? And during that time, my neighbor's wife didn't attempt to stop him. It was like she was enjoying his games. I didn't feel remorse for my neighbor or anything like that at the time, even though I would consider him a friend as he had been giving me a ride for more than a year. I was just really excited by the whole situation. Then when it got really dark and they were done for the night, they were all heading back into the house. My neighbor was walking in front, carrying his son. Marcus and the neighbor's wife were behind the neighbor. Marcus had his hand under the neighbor's wife's dress as they walked. It was quite dark outside and only a little bit of moonlight, so it would have been hard for someone close to them to see what they were up to. I couldn't believe that he had his hand under the neighbor's wife's dress when he was so close to the neighbor. I didn't find the behavior disgusting back then. I actually found it kind of exciting. It wasn't until the next week, probably on a Wednesday, that the neighbor gave me a ride again. He was talking about how much fun he had over the past weekend, not knowing that his friend had been touching his wife intimately. I felt sorry for him and fought the temptation to tell him the truth. After I went back home, I remember feeling bad for feeling excited why my neighbor was being betrayed by his best friend's action. I told myself that I would find the bravery to tell him the next time I saw him. Luckily, the very next day he gave me a ride again. However, I wasn't really paying attention to what he was saying that day because I was busy thinking about how to tell him that his wife was involved with his best friend. I was trying really hard to find the courage to say it, but it was difficult. I remember him arriving at my house and waiting for me to open the passenger car door, but I was still trying to figure out how to tell him that his wife was being unfaithful. He saw that I was having a hard time trying to say something. I was just sitting there, feeling like I couldn't speak properly, like a confused boy. I was trying to talk, but the words didn't come out easily. He turned off his car engine and looked at me strangely. He asked me if everything was okay. Finally, I blurted out, "Your wife is having X with Marcus." Then I quickly opened the passenger door and ran away. I hurried to my door, unlocked it, and rushed inside the house. I went upstairs and looked out the window. His car was still parked on the road where he dropped me off. It took him about 3 more minutes before he drove away. When I think back to that time, I can now laugh at how much anxiety I had. I was really nervous around people. I didn't make eye contact, which is probably why other kids found me awkward, and I was picked on a lot. I even thought I might have autism, but I eventually learned that I didn't. The next day, I was really hoping I wouldn't see the neighbor when the school bus dropped me at my drop-off location, but I realized I was in trouble when I saw his car waiting for me. It was the first time he had waited like that. I tried to walk away, but he called out to me. I got into his car and stared straight at the dashboard. He began talking about what I had told him the day before when I blurted out about his wife and Marcus. He said he had been thinking about it since I left, and he had a feeling that something might be going on between his wife and Marcus. He was wondering how I knew about it. He already knew I was a bit different from other kids, and I could tell from our conversation that he thought I might have some kind of special ability, like being psychic. I started to explain to him how my dad had gotten me a telescope. His house was within view, and I saw his family, along with Marcus, in their backyard. That's when I decided to start watching them. That's how I saw what they were up to. But I didn't mention to him that I had recorded it because I wasn't sure if I would get into trouble for doing that. I was a really shy kid, very, very shy. And it didn't help that the things I told him made him really angry, upset, and animated. I wasn't certain if he was mad at me. He drove to my house really quickly, using bad words and saying he wanted to hurt his wife and Marcus. As soon as he dropped me off, he rushed away to his own house. I had already decided not to show him the recording because I was worried he might become violent. I didn't see him again for about 2 weeks. During that time, I looked through my telescope to see if I could spot him, but I only saw his wife and son. On the 3rd week, I was glad to see him, but he seemed different. He wasn't as talkative. He did let me know that he and his wife were going to get divorced. I didn't ask for more details. The next time I heard about the divorce was from my parents. They were friends with him, and they were discussing the neighbor's divorce. Luckily, my name didn't come up in their conversation. I never saw the neighbor again, and they moved away from the house. Now, after 11 years, I am a more outgoing person, and I have a good number of friends, real friends. I looked up the neighbor's Facebook page, and I saw that he had remarried someone else and started a new family. I used to think about sending him the recordings, but I always convinced myself not to. It might bring back old painful memories, and I am not sure if it would be helpful. And I am not even sure if it's allowed by the law. Thank you for making it to the end of this video. Please support the channel by hitting the thumbs up for the algorithm. Please subscribe if you haven't already. And let's get some reaction on the comment section. Thank you and have